We are back with working on the Nissan Gloria. In this video, I hope to fully assemble the car and hopefully even start welding it. That's my plan at least. The very next step in the build is honestly test fitting all of the parts for good and tack welding them into position. Now before I put this floor pan on, the new trunk pan, I wanted to weld these back onto the frame rails. This is the subframe brace that goes to the frame rails, and I thought I was going to be able to take this off with the floor pan, but that was clearly not the case. So while I have this easy access, I think I'm going to do that now, because with the floor covering it, I'll have to do it under the car and there'll be way less opportunity to get a good weld here. So first I'm going to hammer it in as much as I can, and then I'll clamp it with a C-clamp, and that'll force it to be where it needs to be. Went ahead and clamped our first point here on the frame rail, and I also put this blanket down so that any weld beads don't fall behind in the crevices, because any bare metal like that, if it gets moist and wet, then that's going to create rust, and we don't want rust to be forming in little crevices. That's way too much gas. I did leave this little piece of bare metal for welding purposes. With the gun. That should be good for gas. I'm probably going to turn up the heat rating to 4. Turn this down to around 45-ish for speed. And we'll adjust our settings accordingly depending on how the welds turn out. So this is some of the thickest metal on the car, so that's why I turned it up. When I'm welding the floor pan, it's going to be much lower, probably 2 or 3 on the amperage. And another reason that I can just weld this back together is because it was never fully removed, so I don't need to align anything to the car. You can see that there's still spot welds on the inside here on both sides and under this tray here. So since I wasn't able to remove it, that's why I'm just welding the tabs back into place. Another thing I just remembered is I have this new light. It's anti-flicker, so it shouldn't cause any issues with filming, meaning it shouldn't put any lines on the screen like it did before. So I'm gonna set this up really quick. Probably lean it against something for now. This is definitely pretty bright. Should help see a lot better. Our very first weld on the car is done. Nice heat. We went all the way through the back. That's exactly what you want. Good penetration. That means we have our settings set up properly. So 4 and 45. For frame rails at least. Yeah, that looks good. See, this is another big reason why after you weld something, you want to coat the inside of whatever you welded, because you can see it melted off the coating that I had on there originally. The weld-through primer can help, but it's still susceptible to be burned through. Alright, now what can we do next? Should probably spray weld-through primer and clean up this surface before we test fit this trunk pan again. Now the inside of the rails will be nice and prepped and hopefully won't rust ever. The next thing I want to do is mount this wheel well, hopefully for the last time. But in order to mount this correctly, I want to make sure that the rear end of this car is level. There's not really much to base it off of, but we do have the subframe brace as a nice leveling point, and then we can compare that to how the car measures out, how it sits as is. Alright, that's pretty level there. You can see the bubbles in the middle. Let's compare that to the subframe brace. Oh. Alright, so it looks like we need to come up on the left side quite a bit here. So I'm most likely going to jack this from probably this subframe point, just because this is the farthest back, and jacking it from there will be most effective. Now I do still have the nut on there. I'm not going to jack it directly from the threads because I don't want to damage the stud. Alright, that looks much better. So now let's slide this guy in there. This one goes in between this outer skin and the inner wheel well here, so it actually is sandwiched. Now we do have a definite spot we can align this to on the bottom front here, because I left this indent here because that way it'd be easier to match up. So we can slide this in there to fit perfectly centered. So that's where we need to install it. So I'm gonna use some self-tapper hex head screws, self-drilling I guess, to hold everything in place. A lot of people have suggested to use the Cleco pins. I don't have those. I use these. They get the job done. I don't really mind using them. And if this curve isn't enough to line it up, there are drilled holes from the factory that they use to align these panels. So I can probably stick a screwdriver through there to ensure it's perfectly centered. Here's an example of how it could look. It's an alignment hole there. I found a screwdriver that fit in there perfectly. Now it slides in and out with ease. And then I clamped it down. So now I can start installing some of these self-tapping holder screws. But I'm really excited on how this is turning out. This is a really nice curve. It matched up this bevel perfectly. Although we are gonna still have to make this little panel for this corner that's missing, but that shouldn't be too bad. So I'm gonna install the first set screw. All right. Now let's align something back here. Looks like we have a definite point on the rear that we can align. Then we can also probably set some screws through this brace. I have this clamped generally in the correct area, but we do have another alignment hole towards the bottom here, which is great. This makes aligning the panels so much easier. Okay, so now this is exactly where we need these panels to be. I'll most likely install a clamp here as well, just to ensure that these panels are tight together and that they are perfectly aligned. Now you may be wondering, not all of these holes are lining up. Is it that far off? Well, not every car is going to be spot welded in the exact same location. You have to imagine when these cars are assembled, there's a big robot that comes in and basically is form fitting to where every point needs to be spot welded, and then just zzz, zzz. So it's not going to be in the exact same location every single time. There is some free play, there is some tolerances allowed. And one thing that I've learned from working on these older Nissans is not a lot of these spot welds have a great tolerance. Although I will admit that the Gloria is a much better built car than the S chassis. When I rebuilt my S13, there were so many spots where I was like, should there be a spot weld there? At this point, I've installed a couple self-tapping screws, got the panel nicely held in position. So now we can disconnect all my clamps. Actually, let me put one on the end there still, but I can disconnect all these clamps. Before I weld this together, because honestly at this point it can be tacked on, I want to test fit the quarter panel to ensure that it's going to be in the correct dimension, because we have a few tabs to line up here and the wheel arch as well, and then it also attaches along this seam as well. Now I think it's going to be good. I think it'll line up perfectly, but you can't just think that. You have to verify that, especially with a main component such as the quarter panel. You want to make sure that's going to be straight. In order to test fit the quarter panel successfully, I'm going to have to match the cut line on the C-pillar. This is something I've been dreading to do because you don't want to mess this cut line up. It'll create a lot of work for yourself if you get this cut wrong. Let's get that last self-tapper in there though. Pretty secure even with just the self-tappers. So far, this is how the quarter panel is sitting on the Gloria. You can see this is where the Gloria original quarter panel goes down to, and then this is how much slack we have to work with. All the way up to here, all the way down to there. So we can make a cut on either panel to make sure that they're perfectly aligned. And we're gonna have to do that first to properly align the rest of the panel, because it's not gonna allow it to sit down as far as it needs to, or inwards as far as it needs to, because you can see it's hitting the C-pillar as it is. Yes, I know I'm scratching the paint, but let's be honest, the whole rear end needs a respray anyways, so I'm not too worried about that. But man, it is cool to see a quarter panel on this actually. It's my first time seeing it. Wow. And then the wheel well tabs will be able to fold in nicely. Looks like everything is lining up. But again, we're not going to be able to hug it correctly because of the fact that it's not able to sit as low as it's supposed to. So let's determine where we want to cut these panels. I'm going to take this one off first, and then we'll decide if we like the cut line on the Gloria. So if you guys remember, when I very first cut this quarter panel off of the car, I cut a little too deep and I actually hit this structure underneath it. So I wanted to make sure that I welded this back shut to ensure that it has its structural integrity. So with that being said, I might cut this higher up just to ensure that we have enough access and room to get to this seam. And then it's kind of hard to see, but it looks like this structure ends right about here. And another thing that I'm thinking of is we have a hole down here for the A to C pillar trim. It's this chrome piece that goes across the whole side of the car. We can actually use that as a jig. We can install that with the screws and make sure that the new quarter panel aligns to that point. So that could be pretty beneficial to cut it a little bit higher up, especially because we have the slack to work with. Now I probably should have drew on this car an outline of how much metal we have to work with. You know what, I think I'm gonna do that first. Okay, not a cut line. Do not cut there. I'm gonna put some hashes in it just to make it obvious. You know what, while we have this panel on here, I'm gonna try and outline just about where the Gloria quarter panel goes to. And again, not a cut line. Make it super freaking obvious. So this is how much quarter panel we have to work with. It's quite a bit. So let's make our cut just above this hole here. We already have the spot welds drilled out just enough for that cut, thankfully. Now I put on this piece of tape to ensure a nice and straight cut line. I am gonna cover up the rest of the interior here so we don't get metal flakes on everything, and also the car surrounding it. Nice. Now let's test. Oh, actually, look at that gap. That's perfect. And we have access to this. All right, let's test fit the blue quarter panel again. Draw our cut line for the blue quarter panel. Make another chop. I wonder, actually, can we put this on top? Will that help line it up? It's pretty difficult, actually. Well, no. Yeah, right there. That's the spot. All right, I'll draw the outline right there. All right, and I'm gonna cut just above this line because we don't want it to be too short and have to fill in a gap. So to make it obvious, put some hash marks and then do a line on top. I'll probably use the tape again because that works really well. All right, we'll put this right on top of that line. Probably 1/2 inch, maybe less, of overlap. All right, got that piece off of there. Let's test fit the quarter panel once again. Hopefully for the last time, maybe. We'll see. Okay, that looks amazing. There we go. Dude, look at how that lines up. It's so perfect. Now I might have to trim back just a little bit on the curves here because as you can see, that's making the quarter panel bump out quite a bit. And that's gonna be impossible to make look nice with body filler. I think this is a good cut line for now, just to verify that everything is in the correct spot, which I believe it is. The wheel wells line up perfectly. Everything locks in as it should. Can't really line up the trunk yet because we haven't gotten that far. We'll work on that next. But man, there we go. It's coming together. Wow, this is my first time seeing the car not crunched from the left side. It's pretty neat. Now that we've confirmed this wheel well is in the correct spot, I'm gonna put some tack welds in place to ensure that it stays in this position. So before I start welding, I'm going to try and grind off some of the weld through primer that is visible through the holes, because weld through primer is mostly for panels that you can't see. So if you can see it, you might as well grind it off because you're guaranteed to get a better weld without welding directly to paint. Now yes, weld through primer is designed to be welded through, but again, it's just better to weld directly onto bare metal. Probably turn the heat down on this. Probably start at 3 because these are much thinner panels than the frame rails, as you can obviously tell. This stuff is pretty flimsy. I am going to install the clamps around the areas that I'm welding just to ensure that the panels are nice and close together. These C-clamps also help hold this panel in tremendously. We have zero gap between this panel and the inner wheel well. This is a pretty interesting clamp. I've clamped the outer wheel well to the inner wheel well by both C-clamps. Now I'm gonna put a vice grip in between this crack here, and that will clamp down the inners. Perfect. We now have a few main points welded into position. So I know for sure this wheel well is gonna remain in the correct spot. I am gonna have to come back and finish welding all of these holes, but I wanted to finish test fitting all of the panels today. So next, let's work on the trunk pan plus rear frame rails. The best way that I found is just to try and slide it on there and then somehow wedge the floor pan on top, and then the frame rails go on bottom, kind of sandwiches the chassis. I put the jack in the rear, that way I have something to sit on, something to hold it up. But now I need to figure out a way to jack up or pinch together the frame rails together, because you can see that there's way too much play here. This essentially needs to be pushed up, and then the frame rails need to be squeezed together to the chassis frame rails. But it looks like our corners are lining up pretty well. This needs to be pushed down quite a bit. Or maybe this just needs to be jacked up higher. Well, it's a good thing I brought my jack from my house. This is my current setup right now. I have 3 jacks, and I put a jack stand extension, I guess, on the back, or on the front too. So this is how it looks. Kind of sketchy because it's balancing basically. This jack didn't go up high enough, so I had to put another jack in between it, and it's not perfectly level. I haven't verified that yet, but what I'm doing now is trying to see how I can align this frame rail to this frame rail, and luckily Nissan put an alignment mark on the bottom here. You can't see the secondary frame rail because that's how far out of alignment it is, but this is just the method that I'm using to try and align it. So I'm going to jack it up a little bit more because we have a gap to fill. And while this does look great right now, this does not line up. So I'm going to need to pull this in. And there's another dot right here actually that aligns on this little U. Honestly, a flathead screwdriver could probably work perfectly to fill in that little gap. Now my fear is if I pull this forward, this whole setup may collapse. But I don't think the screwdriver isn't big enough. Oh, look at that. Perfect. Right there, all the seams are aligned. Now before I tack weld anything into place, I need to install both quarter panels. Not tack weld those either, but just to make sure that the trunk pan is at the right height. Maybe I'll even throw on the trunk just to be extra cautious. But this is really difficult to try and balance with the jacks. Yeah. But hey man, if it's working, it's working. But now that I'm thinking about it, since I have this one lined up and centered, I'm gonna put a C-clamp on this rail. That way it doesn't shift around and move. Before we test fit the quarter panels, let's do this frame rail as well. Okay, whoa, at first glance, this looks like a normal car now. Not bad for a rough test fit. So it looks like the trunk pan actually needs to come back some. I did put one vice grip here just to ensure the quarter panel stays in its correct location. Before I adjust that one, let me put on the other quarter panel. Now, if you remember, this isn't the new quarter panel or the old quarter panel. This is the one off the parts car. And this parts car that I got it off of was T-boned on the driver's side. So right here, it was all caved in. But luckily, the rear end was nice enough that we could use this to align the rear clip. Oh, is the jack going to be in the way? Okay, wow, this rear trunk pan is extremely not level right now. Actually, I'm curious. Yeah. Put one clamp here. Hopefully that's enough to hold this quarter panel up. Now we need to level out the rear end. This is way off. This side needs to be lifted quite a bit. I need a fourth jack. Maybe I can just relocate this one. Hopefully nothing falls. Okay, we're going up. That's looking better. Uh-oh, we lost our jack stand. But it's a good thing we installed that C-clamp, so the frame rail should hopefully still be in the right spot. Oh, we are looking almost level. Perfect. All right. Quarter panel wraps around the trunk panel. The whole rear end needs to be scooted back at least an inch. That's quite a bit. Things are starting to align much better now. Been working with it just a little bit. This side is perfectly aligned. Everything lines up as it should. Some of these tabs are folded up and down. That's all right. I'm just trying to make sure that everything's in the right spot, and it is. This side, good to go. Now I was wondering why this side still had such a fat gap, and I realized I accidentally put the quarter panel on the wrong side. Basically, you can kind of see an indication here. This is supposed to be the inner lip. I had to look at this side to remember. So I need to take off this quarter panel and put it on the inside of the trunk pan. That's probably why it's not sitting correctly. Everything's on the opposite side here. And I also remembered that there's threads in the frame rails which will help bring down this floor pan evenly. You can see the threads right there, right there. I already started one bolt right here. So another nice little touch that Nissan did. I've never seen another car like that, having threaded holes in the frame rails. You see one right there. All right, you wouldn't believe this, but after flipping the quarter panel to the correct side of the trunk pan, everything aligns perfectly as it should. That looks insane. It's even leveled out. Everything looks good. Now, this is why I value test fitting everything before welding it into position. Minus the wheel well, that's kind of a separate operation. But I'm just verifying that all the seams are aligning. And I was gonna clamp the bottom of the quarter panel here, but I was like, wait, where's that seam? I don't even see it. And you can see the trunk pan got folded, probably from being pushed around, pulled around the yard or whatever. So now I can start drilling some of those self-tappers and hold this trunk pan in place. Place a few tack welds, take off the quarter panels, and then fully weld everything. Sounds easy, right? But we still have to make sure that the floor on top here is aligned as it should be. It's gonna be a whole nother mission in itself, but you know what? We're making some great progress. Let's keep it rolling. This is such a cool way to see the panel gap close right before your eyes. Oh, just sunk into place. Oh, that was satisfying. That is so satisfying. Oh, there's one more threaded hole there. I'm gonna find a bolt with a bigger washer. That way it pulls more surface area down. But man, just these two alone made quite the difference. Actually, one more thing I want to do before securing this into position for good is test fit the trunk, which means I need to put on the trunk hinges. I don't, however, plan to put on the trunk hinge springs yet. It's not really necessary at this point, especially because I'm probably gonna have to take these off again. If I can verify that the trunk fits from here to here, then I'll know for sure everything is in the correct dimension, everything is nice and level, and plus we might as well use the last panel available to verify this is in the right location. Because once we start welding and putting all these self-tappers in, it's gonna be really hard to correct that. So let's just take our time that we do have and do it right. I don't think there was a difference. Yes, there's definitely a difference. Hopefully these are marked left versus right. These hinges have quite a bit of wiggle room here, so I'm going to try and tighten it down where the witness marks are. You can kind of see where there's missing paint. I'm going to move it to where there's no missing paint. And these are the hinges off of that half cut, because the hinges that were on this Gloria were completely crunched and folded, so they would definitely not work. Now I am going to have to move this clamp here in order to close the trunk, so I might have to install at least one self-tapper for now. But it's going to be a real pleasant time trying to install this trunk by myself. There's a lot of play in these. Is that normal? All of my cars, except for one, actually I guess two now, are hatchbacks. So I don't deal with trunk hinges too often. But I don't know, to me that seems like a lot of wiggle room. Am I supposed to do that? Can anyone confirm? All right, let's go get our trunk. Hello, Seafoam S13. This is not gonna be easy. Don't ask me how, but I managed to get all 4 bolts started. That was definitely a struggle. Way harder than putting a hood on by myself, I'll tell you that much. Moment of truth. I have aligned the trunk to the best of my abilities to where they were before, originally. I tried to match where the paint was missing, but this is a whole different car, so we'll see how it fits. Okay. Ooh, we got some overlap over here. Gonna have to pull at least one side out more. Oh yeah, this side too. All right, good thing we checked once again. Very important to test fit everything that you have. Okay, that looks a lot more normal. What's that clicking sound? Okay, now it's just sitting perfectly where it needs to. Wow. That's cool. That's insane. As for this side though, I've already drilled that hole. Luckily I didn't weld it, but this one definitely needs to be pulled out some more. At least the top. Everything on the bottom looks okay. So yeah, we need to adjust this a little bit. Actually, you can kind of see the gap in between the quarter panel and the inner structure. So that makes sense that the quarter panel needs to move out some. It wants to. Just so I don't mess myself up and accidentally latch this, I'm gonna go ahead and take off the latch on the bottom. Looks like the trunk is the actual latch mechanism, but this contains the release. So if I just take off these 2 bolts here, the trunk cannot latch. Also, I need to find a way to hold this trunk up. It's quite heavy without the springs. Maybe I should throw the springs on. It's my temporary solution to hold the trunk up. All right, let's undo this little guy and try and pull it up. Maybe even undo this. Got some mud in here from the trunk, dang it. Yeah, look at that. There's a slight gap there as well. That's how much we need to pull it out. That's a lot more flush with the inner structure. Still hitting in this corner. And that's the fun of it. We got to keep going back and forth, making a small adjustment here and there, and making sure it fits. In my opinion, this is the most difficult part of the project. It's the most time consuming and the most important. As much as you want to rush past this process and just start welding, you're going to mess yourself up in the long run. So might as well do the best you can to the best of your abilities. Honestly, it looks like we can pull out some of the trunk from the hinge. There's a lot of adjustment where the trunk bolts on to the hinge itself, so that could help. Yeah, it looks like we have a gap here as well. That definitely needs to be pulled out some. Right, this side is now aligned. Let's work on this side. Oh yeah, that definitely needs to be scooted over a little bit. Oops, strip that one a little bit. This is the wheel well to the trunk pan. I'm beginning to connect these seams via self-tappers. Well, unfortunately, we didn't meet our goal. We did not tack weld the car together, but I do feel that the progress that we made today is substantial. I did throw on a taillight just to get a feel for it, and it looks insane. Both quarter panels do still have to come off. As you guys know, work needs to be done under them. Thankfully, we got the trunk pan aligned. So next time we come here, hopefully we can start welding this entire car back together. Well guys, thank you for sticking around for another video. I hope this motivates you guys to get work done on your own project cars. See you guys in the next one. Peace.